Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonny Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I sit down with Liz Loeb, the Associate Director of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. We talk about how she got started at MNIPL, how her activism and Judaism intersect, and what showing up looks like to her on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Liz Loeb, welcome
Hello.
to the Who the Folk podcast.
It's so nice to be here.
It is so nice to get to talk to you. So you are the Associate Director of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light.
Correct.
Okay. What is Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light?
Funny you should ask. You are not the first to ask.
I would think not.
So it's not an energy company, which is what some people think sometimes.
Okay.
We are a statewide nonprofit organization, a social movement organization, and we work with communities of faith, conscience, and spiritual practice across Minnesota and also nationally at the intersection of climate justice and racial justice.
Wow.
Yeah. We have plenty to do.
There's a lot going on within that.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with I suppose the most local to us here in Minnesota. I'm going to guess, based on the explanation you have given
Yes.
of the organization, the protests around the Line 3 pipeline.
Yes.
Very much in your wheelhouse, aren't they?
So much.
Okay. So given something like that, what is your organization's role and generally in your role specifically in the fight against Line 3?
Right. So first, as an organization and as a movement of people, we believe in a world where water is sacred, where Native treaty rights and sovereignty are respected, and where rural communities can thrive and prosper. And Line 3 is destructive to all three of those values and desires. And our role as a multiracial and multi-faith organization, working with people who are coming from places of faith, conscience, and spirituality, in a very diverse way, our role is to show up in witness, solidarity, and action with Native people on the ground who are leading the struggle to stop Line 3 and to create a world where all of us can thrive.
Okay. So you're not wanting to go in there and necessarily lead or take over anything.
Definitely not take over.
You're very much, it sounds like you're very much taking your cues from the organization, from the people, not the organizations, the people who are most affected by things like Line 3. Yes,
and that's a founding principle of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. We often call it MNIPL.
Okay.
MNIPL, which you can imagine is easier.
A little bit.
I will raunchily admit that a friend of mine once pointed out that you could say MNIPL. And I feel like once you figure that out, you're not going to forget it.
You can't go back.
MNIPL. But I say MNIPL.
Okay.
Just for giggles. And a founding principle of MNIPL is that the people who are most impacted by the systems around us are the most able to lead towards transformation and often have the most creativity and resilience around what transformation can be. But we also can't leave folks who are most impacted unsupported.
Right.
And unresourced. And so there's a model of shared and collaborative leadership that I think runs so deep. And so many people who are part of MNIPL are directly impacted by Line 3, by the climate crisis. There are lots of Native folks in our organization, but it's really about looking towards Native leadership on the ground, on the front lines, to define what showing up needs to look like.
Okay. So the I think it's a really interesting area, the what showing up looks like. Because that is, I hear that a lot in talking to different people, particularly in the social justice, social action movements. But that probably is different and looks different and feels different depending on who you're showing up for.
Yeah,
right?
It's contextual and it can seem a little squishy, even though it's not.
It
sort
of
squishy.
It can.
That's the thing about things that are contextual. Said the Jew who's like, 8 opinions, please. Yeah. Maybe it's squishy. Maybe it's complicated. But it is, and I think that's fabulous.
Yes.
So for us, it's really acknowledging we all have a responsibility to the earth, to future generations, to ending white supremacy, to our shared liberation. That responsibility lives in all of us, and the interest in transformation towards those conditions lives in all of us. So how do we take responsibility for our role in a collective way?
So
Still squishy. I said interrupting you.
No, very much still squishy. And that interrupt away. That's totally fine. Interesting what you said there. The sort of how white supremacy comes into it, because that may seem to people listening sort of from out of left field a little bit. How does white supremacy and anti-Semitism and anti-nativism and that sort of, those sort of antis, how do they play into what you and your organization are trying to fight against?
Ooh, yummy.
I'm going to sit back now. I
friend.
Wound you up a little bit. Go for it.
Where to start? There are so many years of history. I think there are lots of things we think we mean when we say whiteness and white supremacy. I think of whiteness as a particular political and social and legal technology that has been operationalized over about 5 centuries now to taxonomize, to categorize people into a hierarchy so as to allow for the extraction of value from land, from bodies, from people, from culture. So it's a way to take things. Like we invent people as white, we say white people are better. There's a very Christian framework around that, and then we get to take things. And so the logic that allows a Canadian corporation to come to Minnesota and harm our water and rural communities in service of profit is that logic isn't possible unless you believe it's okay to own things, take things, have other people suffer the costs. And whiteness has been so key, again, as a political technology in making that set of relationships possible. And so much to say about anti-Semitism, which is inextricable from the logic of white supremacy, because, Jews come in all racial identities. Again, race having been this brokered and negotiated way of being that...
It's a construct.
It's a construct, but also very real. So incredibly real.
Yes, very.
Because we live it, right? So Black, Brown, Native, Indigenous, Jews of color, Mizrahi, and Sephardi Jews are experiencing what it's like to live through multiple identities in political reality. And for Jews who are either Ashkenazi or white, and those things are not always the same, who come through diaspora in particular ways. But for Jews who have access to whiteness, for folks who can't see me, I experience the world as white. People would look at me and say, hey, you're white.
Same.
Yeah. And my Jewishness and the Jewishness of our people in particular ways has been structured as conditional within whiteness, so that Jews can be set up to be both more powerful than they actually are and untrustworthy. And I know you know this. The purpose of that is to delegitimize political movements by folks of color, by Black, Brown, Native, and Indigenous folks and folks of color, right? There's a way it works that says, I know you know this, but people listening might want to... Or you tell me.
No,
I
don't know. Please, by all means, though,
it
is important.
I definitely don't want to lecture.
No, but that's okay. This is,
this
is obviously this is a really important area to be diving into, though, because it is way, you started in on it, but it is way more interconnected than most people think or know.
Yeah.
Significantly so.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I don't mean to interrupt by all means.
No, come on in.
But no, I was gonna.
This is what a conversation is.
This is what a conversation is, but this is one of those very important things, though, that sort of needs to be talked about, and it's why there are, groups locally like Jewish Community Action, and nationally like Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, and synagogues like Shir Tikva and others locally and around the country that have put themselves out on the forefront of that sort of work, because for a lot of Jews who look like you and I do okay, pretty easy. We get by on that and be safe in our whiteness.
Yeah. To a point, right? Because not just as Jews, but white supremacy is coming for all of us. It's not good. It's not good for people, or the planet, or pets, right? It is a destructive force in the world.
Absolutely.
But that violence is visited upon folks of color, Native, Black, Brown, POC folks first, and most intensely. But it's actually not good for any of us.
No.
But we feel safe to a point, and so that changes how we think we need to act.
Right. Absolutely. So we can, hide our Jewishness.
Yeah.
if we so choose for our own safety, but it doesn't really make us safe if we're doing it at the, not to the exclusion of, that's not the word I'm looking for, but to the detriment of our neighbors.
Exactly. And it's some cost to ourselves of not being able to live out our full selves.
We have yes. I mean, if you have a soul, sure. but
you know. But yes. But I think that's what's so.
I didn't mean to be a smart ass and
no, I
derail
love it.
things.
Bring the smart ass, please. I am such a fan. But I'm thinking about that slipperiness, right?
Yeah.
Of knowing that we are doing a wrong to our neighbor if we choose to benefit from a system of violence. Mm-hmm. And also that we are taking something from ourselves and from our full spiritual being, and to hold both because we're interconnected and interdependent, because that's what community is.
Right. And that's really, that's the thing. It's, I mean, I think for some, if you don't care about this sort of thing, I guess that's okay. You probably define community a little bit differently than I do. And
I love that.
You do.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's your choice. But I don't know. It seems like a crummy way to go about things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you get involved in this work? What brought you, I guess, not just to the social justice, social action thing, but to, I guess, in general there, but Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light?
It's funny because there's the story of how did I become a community organizer? How did I become clear that social justice was my call in life? Yeah. And the incredible gratitude I have for being able to pursue that path. It feels like such a gift that this is my work. I came to Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light through relationships, through collaborative work that was both part of organizations and not defined by organizations. So you sort of keep finding yourselves doing things with the same people, and eventually you form organizational relationships based on those relationships of comradeship and solidarity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which has been beautiful.
So I guess from a schooling standpoint, what's your background? Is it...
Yeah.
Was it like sociology? Like it sort of feels like a sort of sociological path, certainly?
Yes. So I grew up in a family where I was expected to go to college, where I had the opportunity to go to a college that gave me an incredible education. And as an undergrad, I studied political science.
Okay.
and something called modern culture media, which is critical social theory.
Oh.
It was so good.
That sounds amazing.
I loved it so much. So it's multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary. It takes from anthropology and post-colonial studies and critical race theory and sociology, and it mixes it all up, and philosophy, and I was in love. And straight out of undergrad, I went to law school at NYU to focus on public interest law, to really ask how can litigation be used as a tool for social change.
Right.
And so I did a joint law degree PhD program called Law and Society that focused on critical social theory, but also on the history of political movements and law as a tool for social change.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It was amazing.
That's incredible.
I loved it so much.
Boy, that seems like
I was so lucky to be part of it.
I mean, perfect background. I mean, it's such a perfect background, like educationally, for what you do now. Like it really you just merged one, from school right into, professionalism / real world / whatever you want to call it.
For a while, I was a lawyer. I was a lawyer with the National ACLU and the Center for Constitutional Rights, and we were trying to use litigation to do things like stop oil companies from killing people in places like Colombia and Myanmar, formerly Burma, and the Nigerian Delta. Oil companies were doing horrible things to people and to land, and really, actually killing people.
Yes.
And so we were trying to use the law to try to stop them.
Okay.
And what we found was oil companies would pay outrageously large sums. We would win. There would be judgments against them, and they would keep doing it because they could afford to. It was worth the legal costs, and it didn't stop them because of many things about how multinational jurisdiction works.
Right.
So then I was with the ACLU at the Criminal Justice Project, and we were trying to use litigation as a tool to end mass incarceration. And we had some significant wins. We had Supreme Court wins. We did things that mattered.
Yeah.
But it turns out litigation is not going to end mass incarceration. organizing is.
Yeah.
And public narrative is, and people working in communities with each other over years. That's what's going to end the violence of mass incarceration. So that for me was just a deep realization that I could make a choice about what my life was going to be, and that which is an incredible thing.
Yeah.
Which is a thing to be treasured.
For sure.
And that I didn't need to just keep doing law because because I was good at it, because I was there, because it was what I had trained to do.
Right.
That I could actually, in some ways, follow my heart. I can't believe I said that on a podcast. But really.
People could, I'm sure if people listened hard enough, they could hear your eyes rolling as you said that.
I really hope they do, but I also made it. And community organizing had gotten me into law in the first place, so I went on back.
Oh, so this seems like it seems like very much the natural progression of things.
Yes.
Well, that's an amazing journey. And and I think you know this, and it sounds like you know that just how fortunate you are to be able to do really what you've always wanted to do.
It's an incredible thing.
Which is so cool. Huh?
Yeah.
So how long have you been with MNIPL?
You did it. Very good. I'm so proud of you.
I almost said MNIPL.
I know.
And
it But now you'll remember us.
Now I don't think there's any doubt about that.
I started in July 2020, so in the middle of the pandemic.
That's a perfect time to start a new job.
I had no idea how tall my colleagues were for a year.
So there's been a lot of action lately that I've seen, and I'm sure it's been going on well before the last few months.
Yeah.
But it seems like there's been a lot more action and seeing a lot more pushback, or I guess a renewed pushback against Line 3.
Yeah.
Is that sort of an effect of the fact that we're sort of coming out of quarantine, and although maybe going back into quarantine? I don't know.
I think it's really because Native folks have been on the front lines, putting themselves at risk, telling the story, talking to people about what it means to be responsible to one another and to the earth, and to care for one another and for the earth. And I think there are folks who said, well, let's see how the process goes. Let's see if the agency process and the legal process does the right thing. And the process did not lead to a right or good result.
Okay.
And there were so many flaws in the process. And I think that's actually a real wake-up call for folks to say, if we just, maybe I don't have to get involved, maybe elected leaders or appointed, agency officials will do the right thing, and then they don't. Everybody has their stuff, right? It's a complicated world.
Yeah.
But we see an oil pipeline being pushed through, even though it's immensely unpopular and destructive to our water and in violation of Native treaties. And people went, sugar doodles. I actually have to do something about this.
Right.
And that was possible because it was not just Native people, but specifically Native women and Native elders who had been there the whole time, holding to their sense of stewardship of culture and love for the earth and for all beings. And I don't mean to say what that is for people, because there's a way that Native folks, and specifically Ojibwe and Anishinaabe folks, would explain it for themselves, and I am not that. But because Native women had been there, making it possible for a movement to grow, having something to invite people into, and taking really brave action.
So what needs to happen to stop it? I feel that it's not nearly as simple an answer as the question was.
I think there are actions Governor Walz could take, and he has chosen not to take them, and I think that's a grievous mistake. And I think it's hard to be the governor. It's hard to be the governor. Governor Walz does a lot of things, and his administration does a lot of different things. I think on Line 3, it is a betrayal of our future, and it deserves to be called that, even if we can be in relationship politically around a number of things and share values around a number of things. I think on Line 3, Governor Walz has betrayed the state, and there's actions he could take to fix that. I think President Biden could also take action administratively through the Army Corps, but I know. Okay. It is true. President Biden could stop Line 3.
Okay.
Through administrative action, and as has been done in other pipelines. And that's not only, I think it's the right thing to do, but
Sure.
like, who am I? There are lots of people in the world. I think it is the necessary thing to do
Right.
because the ecological impacts would be so catastrophic, and because we need to live in a world where native treaties mean something.
Right. I mean, and I think I would hope most people know that for years,
Yes.
they not worth the paper they've been written on.
Yes.
Which is an entirely different podcast, I feel like.
I know somebody who could come on and have that podcast
I'm
with you.
sure that you do, and that's worth exploring another time.
And she's Jewish. I mean, there are so many Native people who you should have on your podcast to talk about this.
We're going to get those names from you off air, because I would absolutely love to have those conversations, though.
Oh, wonderful.
But and I do think that it's a yeah. I mean, look, it's obviously problematic the way we as a country have treated native tribes and their land over, our history, which is comparatively short compared to theirs.
Yes.
Given by how many centuries, millennia even, they predate us on this land.
Yeah.
But, us as a people not doing right by native tribes is, unfortunately very much embedded in the history of this, this country, even before that.
Yeah. It's a wound, and it's going to
it's a gaping.
Yeah.
And how do you, I don't even know if you can make it right at this point. I mean, there are steps you could do to stop the wrongs, but I mean, to fully make it right?
Yeah.
Could that happen?
I think it's the people who have experienced the harm who get to say so, not us.
No, I think you're right.
So it, like all things, it starts with coming into a different relationship and even asking the question and then meaning it and then really being willing to change structures and resources in our lives to make it possible for their, I don't think you can make attempted genocide right, but I think you can change what relationships are like now in ways that matter.
Yeah. So pivoting, well, I would say slightly, but significantly from this
Go
topic,
for it.
from talking
I believe
about
in you.
genocide.
I know it's fun, right?
Right.
I do not mean to be flip. People who are listening, I take it very seriously.
No. I think if they listen to the preceding 20-odd minutes, I think they would know. I would hope they would know that.
Yes.
How does your Judaism, and I guess your personal relationship with Judaism, not necessarily in practice, but just in your belief structure, how does that tie into the work that you do, both with MNIPL and your preceding stops? Because it all sort of feels like they're all part of the similar theme.
Sometimes it feels so infused that it's hard to even pick out particular threads because it's so much a part of who I am and how I come to the world. Mm-hmm. But I think I think the deep understanding that there are always multiple perspectives and multiple truths, that we exist in multiplicity, that there are things that are clear but rarely simple, that we live in a complex system.
Yeah.
That's something I've always experienced through Judaism. But also just the profound knowing that we are interconnected and we are responsible to one another. The sense of being a collective people and of having a collective life that my experience of what I might call my individual life, even though what is that if we're interdependent, right?
Sure.
But is one matters to me very much.
Well,
but is one part of such a bigger like lifefulness.
Right, and I think there's a lot in that you have you as an individual, but then the you that operates in a collective, whether it's with your partner, whether it's with your friends, whether it's with your job, whether it's with your Jewish community, however you identify that. It's,
whatever that is to
right,
you.
whatever that is to you, Liz, you, the listener, you, whoever, right? That's we look at those things, individually, but it is that sort of how you operate as the collective. That's
and just what it means to live an ethical life with others, and I, as I reflect, it's it's so fabulous to be invited to reflect in this way, because I think I discover something every time. My experience of Judaism is so wired into the seasons and to the life of the earth.
Okay.
And to the lunar calendar and the sense of ebb and flow and how the calendar of the year shapes and changes, that it just reminds me that we are connected to the beings around us, to the earth and to the seasons and to the land.
Yeah.
And I think especially because the history of my family goes through diaspora.
Mm-hmm.
To have been unrooted, to have been expelled.
Yeah.
And to find home. I mean, I live on stolen native land.
Yep.
And I also know that I have not a deep connection to the land, and one that it's not negotiable. It's there whether I know it or not, or want it or not.
Right.
And the calendar of Judaism keeps teaching me that and brings me back to other ways of being that might not always be reflected in dominant culture. Mm-hmm. Which leads me to the last thing, which is what I love. I love so many things. I like being Jewish. I'm fond of it. But being part of a religious minority taught me some things really early about Christian hegemony and the dangers of fascism. I mean, you get that young
you do.
In an Ashkenazi Jewish family, so I got,
Which is funny because you say that, and I sort of think back and in hindsight, oh yeah, that actually, but I think trying to connect the dots as a kid growing up in the 80s.
Yeah, me too.
I don't really, why would I have, I wouldn't have connected the dots in that way, but now, like, I learn things now, and I listen to people now, and I, even occasionally read things on Twitter that are useful, but not often. Not often. But
judiciously.
Very. But there are a few really, really smart people out there that I enjoy reading and learning from, and I read what they write now, and I sort of put it back in the context of my growing up, and I'm like, oh, damn.
Yeah.
Oh, that kind of, now I see it. It all kind of checks out going back, but you don't really think about it in that way.
Yeah.
I mean,
but it gives you a different framework.
Very much so. Very much. I mean, it really is one of the, if I knew now, if I knew then what I know now, right? I mean, right? It's mind-blowing.
Mind expanding.
Yes. But it is, I do think that growing up as a religious minority like that does sort of, I think you learn a lot. I think you learn what a lot of other people think your place is.
Yep.
And how you push back against that.
Yeah. Yeah. And my experience of Judaism growing up was that we had stories that had wisdom in them about what that means.
Right.
And about how to act.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and it's you sort of clearly have taken those childhood lessons, and it's very much stuck with you, not just in how you live personally, but in how you translate that into your work.
Yeah.
Both professionally and personally, it seems like.
I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, far be it from me to say I met you an hour ago, but
no, I totally appreciate it.
Just this is just what I, glean from the conversation, that's all.
Well, I feel like you talk to people for a living, so.
I do.
You might have some skills in that area.
Sometimes. Sometimes. I like to think I'm a pretty good judge of character, but never know.
True.
Well, Liz, this has been fascinating, but I have 2 more questions I have to ask you.
Yes,
before we go.
I'm so ready.
What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
It's like there are different different holidays for different moods. Big fan of Sukkot.
Absolutely. Okay.
Right? You get to be in a little hut with snacks.
As an outdoor, and as somebody, who loves nature and kind of
right.
That kind of sure.
Yeah, woodsy hut with snacks.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
And this perfect time of year, right? I mean, depending on where you live, but you come out of the experience of Yom Kippur, which has its charms, very grounding.
Absolutely, very.
But then you kind of burst into Sukkot.
Yeah.
I also, Purim.
Sure.
I'm queer, very queer holiday.
Yes.
Revelry. And maybe just a dash of Simchat Torah. What with the dancing and the candy?
Yeah.
And the Torah, it's kind of nice.
Sure.
But I feel like
you're about candy, snacks, booze, and dressing up.
Yes. Yes, and like radical queerness and community.
There you go.
So if I Purim's really up there.
Okay. You don't have to pick one. I mean, most people do, but
we get to have all of them.
We do. We get to have so many of them.
Yes.
What's your favorite Jewish food?
So how to separate the nostalgia from what I actually like?
Always a challenge.
And the sense of what's culturally a Jewish food but like bagels and lox.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so good.
Absolutely.
And I'm from New York, so like real bagels and lox.
I'm not getting into this discussion. I can't. We thought like in quarantine, we're like, let's order bagels from New York. Let's do we're here, we're stuck. Let's I have a hard time with the hype. I'm not sure it lived up to it.
I feel like my values tell me to affirm your experience, but I'm struggling.
but your lineage wants to tell me to screw off.
A little bit, but like kindly. What I really want is for you to experience the joy of real New York bagels and lox. Like maybe you just don't know.
I might, and I think that is fair. I will grant you that. I might just not know.
But
that's fine.
People like different things, and that's okay.
Thank you for affirming that, even if it may have been slightly condescending.
Just about this one thing, though. This is where it all comes out for me.
That's fine. You know what? This is your thing. This is the hill you're going to die on. We all got to have it.
I can live with that.
That's fine. Liz Loeb, this has been a delight. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for a bit and talking. This was awesome.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.